To me, existential questions really live at the heart of the climate crisis. So we are in a constant sense-making effort. What does it mean to be human here today, but also tomorrow? What's that understanding that sits deeper than knowledge so that we may act with intention at the interplay of head, heart, and hands? Not a forever set of answers to these questions, but questions that we continue to grapple with day after day on this rapidly shifting planet. So what I want to do today is offer up kind of a cartography of this moment, a snapshot of how I'm making sense of the climate crisis and where we are and who we're called to be. And so far this year, I've really been heads down bringing two publications to life, the Drawdown Review, and also a forthcoming anthology of women's climate wisdom, co-edited with Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. So those publications and the thinking embedded in them are very much grounding my cartography of this moment. If we're going to do mapping, I think it makes a lot of sense to start with where. In the most general sense, we know where we are. We are on planet Earth in the year 2020, facing what seems to be a growing simultaneity of crises. One of the vital signs, of course, is the rising concentration of heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere. I think of it in some ways like an EKG that has spiked wildly beyond normal range of up, down, up, down, up, down. We are sitting at roughly 415 parts per million of carbon dioxide blanketing the globe, and then also other greenhouse gases doing their work in our atmosphere. We are in totally uncharted territory as a human species. We've never lived on a planet like this, much less a planet that we may be heading for. And as you can see here, when we look from 1850 to present, Earth's temperature has been rising, and we are coming dangerously close to that critical 1.5 degrees Celsius increase of warming from pre-industrial times. Science has made it very, very clear the necessity of wholesale and unprecedented transformation that this moment requires. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has called for rapid and far-reaching transitions in literally every sector of our economy. And we've got to do that today. We have to reach roughly 50% emissions cuts by 2030 to have a shot at a stable climate for the future. Here you see very much the same story, but more with the spirit of an artist. This image is called Warming Stripes, and again, it shows where we are and just how quickly things have changed in the scope of human history. And while James Baldwin wasn't writing about the climate crisis when he penned these words, I think this quote captures our moment so well. We've made the world we're living in, and we have to make it over. This call to take responsibility for the future, to take responsibility and participate in the transformation required, that is precisely the moment that we find ourselves in. And we could spend the rest of this lecture unpacking the question of who is the we that made the world we're living in. But the we who has to make it over is very clear, and that is all of us, because no one is stepping up to do the work. We've got to be the ones. But perhaps more important than where we are is the question of where we want to go. And Drawdown is one way to think about that. Drawdown is simply the point in time, sometime in the future, when the concentration of heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere could actually stop rising and begin to decline year over year. It's essentially a critical tipping point, perhaps the critical turning point. And we've got to get there as quickly, as safely as possible, and with equity really centered at the heart of the transformation. And if we want to reach Drawdown, we've got to attend to this cartography as well, to both the current sources of global emissions from electricity, food, agriculture and land use, industry, transportation, buildings, and energy extraction and production, as well as the other side, the natural systems that actually reclaim some of that excess carbon, bringing it back on land and at sea. And to have any chance at all of reaching that critical turning point of drawdown, we have to work on both sides of this equation, essentially pulling out all the stops across all of these pieces of the puzzle. But ultimately, I think our aspirational where is fairly simple. It is about relative climatic stability. It is about coming back into balance with the planet's living systems that makes life on Earth possible. But it's also about coming into balance in our human systems. I think sometimes about climate change really as feedback, not as the problem, but as one loud and perhaps very damning piece of evidence that our current way of operating is deeply defunct, that it cannot continue this way. But we're getting that feedback from so many other directions as well: mass inequality, fraying democracy, pervasive loneliness and meaninglessness. The list goes on. And as we face the truth of where we are and where our current trajectory could send us, I think it's also critical that we cultivate and hold a vision of possibility for a regenerative future, for ourselves, for all of life, ultimately imagining a world on the other side of drawdown. So what then are our means of reaching that future, of actually turning possibility into reality? As many of you know, solutions are Project Drawdown's bread and butter. We are a small nonprofit that really aims to provide the world with a resource for climate solutions. So what are the practices and the technologies that are already in hand today that either stem or sequester emissions and can actually help turn things around? The Drawdown Review was the first major update to our work since the book we published in 2017 called Drawdown. And what's wonderful about this new update is it is available now on our website. You can download the PDF at drawdown.org. One of the critical things in this update is that we've evolved the framework that we use for helping folks understand climate solutions. And we really think about these three interconnected areas of action. Reducing sources, essentially the left side of that rainbow visualization that's all about bringing emissions to zero. Also supporting nature's carbon sinks, the right side of that visual, uplifting the carbon cycle. This is where photosynthesis works its magic. And then ultimately, the critical foundation of improving society, fostering equality for all, and understanding the planetary ripple effects of human rights. Each of these areas has sectors and subgroups of solutions sort of nested within it, but they add up to this intersecting trifecta of critical areas of action. And what you'll see here is just really a snapshot of top-line results from Project Drawdown's analysis. We ran two different scenarios for the growth of solutions between now and 2050. And that's compared to just a business as usual trajectory. One you might think of as quite ambitious, and one you might think of as very, very ambitious. In the first one, you see an emissions impact of almost 1,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent between 2020 and 2050. That's roughly 25 years worth of current annual emissions. In the second scenario, you see an impact of almost 1,600 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent over 30 years. That's about 40 years worth of current annual emissions. What's interesting with both of these scenarios is that they tell a very similar financial story. There is a sizable, but actually very doable cost to implement solutions. But then we see an incredibly significant savings over time. And that's just if you look at direct cost and direct savings alone. The ROI is super compelling, but it is astronomically higher if we start to add in avoided damages, the health benefits of reducing pollution, et cetera, et cetera. The story here from a financial perspective is really, really clear.